Alright, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and I've been doing a series of video presentations for the AWD1111 course to be taught in fall 2020 at Rankin. And the book is, the video presentations are from the book Get Programming with Node.js by Jonathan Wexler, a Manning publication. And I'm up to section 6.3 on page 67, so slowly but slowly I'm making my way through. So it says the goal of this section is to make it easier to manage and edit your routes. If all of your routes are in an if-else block, when you decide to change or move a route, that change might affect others in the block. Also, as your list of routes grows, you'll find it easier to separate routes based on HTTP method used. If the /contact method can respond to a post and a GET, for example, your code to route will route to the appropriate function as soon as the request method is identified. As the main.js file grows, your ability to filter through the code gets more and more complex. That would make sense. To alleviate this problem, we're going to move our routes into a new file called router.js. As it says, we will also restructure the way that we store and handle our routes. So we are to add the code in listing 6.5 to router.js. In the source code available, it says this code exists in a new project folder called Better Routes. In this file, we define a routes object to store routes mapped to post and get. As routes are created in main.js, they'll be added to the routes object according to their type. The object doesn't need to be accessed outside of this file. Next, create a function called handle to process the routes callback function. This function will access the routes object by the request HTTP method, using just that from the routes array, and then find the corresponding callback through the request target URL using the request URL array. If you make a GET request for the /index.html URL path, you'll get a callback predefined in your routes object. Last, whatever callback function is found in the routes object is called and passed the request and response so you can properly respond to the client. If no route is found, you get a not found. Alright. The handle function checks whether an incoming request matches a route in the routes object by its HTTP method and URL, otherwise it logs an error. Use a try-catch to attempt to route the incoming request and handle the error that would otherwise cause the system to crash. You also define get and post functions and add them to the exports so that the new routes can be registered for main.js. This way in main.js you can add new callback associations such as /contact in the routes by entering get contact HTML callback function. So, as you can see, it looks at least like this is router.js right here. And I'm breaking my rule again, but I am anyway, so let's see. This is main, so I'm going to want to come in here and add a new file that is called router.js. Paste this in. I'm going to have to pause for a moment here. Sorry about that, but my neighbor has the unique capability of starting up his lawnmower when I am trying to work, but that's the way it is. More HTTP methods could go here, but we'll worry about that later. When you call get or post, you need to pass the URL of the route and the function you want to execute when that route is reached. These functions register your routes by adding them to the routes object where they can be reached and used by the handle function. Alright, and they show a picture here on page 70 of what's going on. The export object gives the other files access to the specified functionality. So as it says, other files that require router.js will have access to objects within the exports object. The get, post, and handle are accessible within router.js. The last step involves importing router.js into main.js. You complete this the same way you import other modules with the require same directory router. You need to prepend router to every function call you make in main.js, as those functions now belong to the router. You can also import the fs module if you plan to serve assets in static HTML files as before. The code should look like listing 6.6, which is on page 71 in the text. With the creation of your server, every request is processed by the handle function in the router module, followed by a callback. As mentioned, now we can define our routes using router.get or router.post. Alright, create a custom read file function called custom read file to make your code more reusable. In this function, you try to read the file passed in and respond to the file's contents. So the last thing that's in here is this. Again, it's long enough. 37 lines, not super duper long, but long enough. So I'm going to grab every bit of it. Copy it to the clipboard. Go back to my copy of main.js. Highlight all of that code I had in there before that I put in recently. Do a control / to comment all of that out. Go back up to the top. And now try to paste in what hopefully will be the last version of this. So file, save all. After adding these changes, restart your node.js application and try to access your home page or index.html route. Remember, with mine, it's main.html. So the project structure follows some of the design patterns used by application frameworks. In the next unit, we'll learn more about frameworks and see why this makes things easier to use. True or false? Functions that are not available. Functions that are not available, that are not added to their module's exports file, are still accessible by other files. I would say that's false. Okay. So let's try to run this. Hope I've saved everything just in case. Let's do a file save all on here. Alright, just a save there. How about that? In there. There we go. That should be good. Node main. Okay. Localhost 3000. Main. No such file exists. thought that's what we called it, but it might not be. So let's check and see if it was index. Let's take a quick look. It was main.html, and it is under my views folder, and I should not have had to have listed the fact that it was under the views folder. I should have been able to just come in here and say main, I believe, but it's telling me no such file exists. Well, this was not a particularly fantastic chapter for me, as you can see. Alright, but we have finished. And we learn how to serve individual files. When I go through this in class, we're going to do this one heck of a lot slower. I've been trying to make these presentations, as you know, somewhere around 15, 20 minutes long each. Occasionally they're a little bit longer. Okay. Alright, says currently we have one route set up. Try adding new routes. We'll get into that. Now, the next chapter is the chapter for this unit, and that is we're going to try to create our first web application from scratch. Alright, I am going to come in there. The great thing is it's not a super duper long chapter. It's the equivalent of about 10 pages. So I'm going to come in, and as always I'll do it as several different tapes, but we'll get into that in just a few minutes.